Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Before we begin, a note from our sponsor. I'm Richard Jacobs, Executive Director of the nonprofit Finding Genius Foundation and host of the Finding Genius Podcast. In late 2016, I was rear-ended at 65 miles an hour by a truck on the highway, which sent me off-road into a ditch. The impact of the collision gave me a concussion and other injuries. At the hospital, a CT scan showed that I had thyroid nodules, which turned out to be cancer. It was then, when I had a biopsy in my neck, that I realized even if I was a millionaire, I wouldn't want a second or a third biopsy due to the pain and the invasiveness of it. And appointments at that time for thyroid experts were 3 to 6 months out. And I was worried about dying now, even if that was irrational. So because of this, I've decided to raise money to conduct a literature review on steroids, on the causes of anxiety and depression, a condition that affects well over 50 million people in the United States and hundreds of millions worldwide. Our goal is to create a codex, a guide that reveals all possible treatments for anxiety and depression for people that live with the condition, or for loved ones that have it, as my wife and my son do. To find out more about our fundraiser, visit findinggeniusfoundation.org and click on current initiatives. And now, to our guest.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. I have Seth Gillihan. He's a clinical psychologist. He's also a best-selling author and a podcast host, and he's the creator of the Think, Act, Be online school. We're going to talk about cognitive behavioral therapy for kids and teens. So, Seth, thanks for coming.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Rich.
Yeah, tell me a bit about your background. Like, why are you interested in CBT and working with teens and kids? And, how did you get where you are?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I started out in psychology because I wanted to work directly with people and try to make a positive difference in people's lives. And I found early in my training that the cognitive behavioral approach really appealed to me, in part because I came from a science background. I didn't have a psychology background at all in college. I studied biology and also French. And so the research basis for CBT really appealed to me, and the idea that it could be really effective in just a few sessions using some pretty straightforward tools, things that were pretty intuitive, that made sense to me as a new trainee, and that I think really resonate with people just on a basic level. So things like, by examining the stories that our minds are telling us, we can discover a lot of the falsehoods that we're living by. So things like these assumptions that we make, like I'm going to fail or nobody's going to like me. So just by figuring out what we're thinking and practicing thinking more helpful thoughts, we can really feel better. We can be more willing to take risks when we're not so sure that we're going to fail. So that's really what drew me to CBT. And then, to be honest, I work some with teens and have worked with kids, but primarily my focus is in working with adults. And I had developed a kind of on-the-go CBT resource called the CBT deck that was intended for adults. And then there was such a need during in general, but even more so with the pandemic. And so I worked with my publisher on a plan to adapt the CBT deck for kids and teens. And the best part about it for me was I got to collaborate on it with my 10-year-old daughter, Ada. Yeah, it was really meaningful because she was a big help just in helping me to get the language right and saying things like, "Yeah, Dad, we don't really use that word," or "That's not really how we would say that," and helping me with the the illustrations and finding the things that really appealed on a visual level. But she had gone through a really intense bout of anxiety herself, and coincidentally around that time, the original CBT deck had come out, and so I'd gotten my author proofs to go through and check for spelling errors and things like that. And so she asked me if she could borrow it, and I didn't know for a while she was using one of the cards each day, and she told me looking back that it was extremely helpful as she came
Really?
through. Yeah, which of course brought tears to my eyes and really convinced me. I thought of it before. It'd be neat to collaborate with one of my kids on this deck.
Yeah.
And she was excited to do it.
But what is this deck? It helps people. What are the cards in the deck? What's on them?
Yeah, so in this particular deck, there are 58 cards there's one practice or one skill per card, and they're divided into 3 categories. So the 3 pillars of CBT are cognitive techniques, behavioral techniques. So that's just planning actions that help move us toward our goals, and then mindfulness. So being in the present in an open and accepting way. And so I abbreviate those: think for cognitive, act for behavioral, and be for mindfulness. Think, act, be. So there are think cards, act cards, and be cards. So generally I recommend, just shuffle the cards, draw one at random. And so there's one that's about standing up for oneself and noticing when our thoughts are really critical and being kinder to ourselves. There are ones about
like when you say bad stuff to yourself or about someone else.
About yourself, yeah. Like when you're saying,
like I'm a fool. Why did I do that? That was so stupid.
Yes, exactly. Like, oh, I'm stupid. I'm never going to get this right. There are ones about helping kids to practice a growth mindset. So if we fail at something, instead of saying I can never do this, saying like, all right, I'm still growing. I'm still learning. It's in our nature to grow and develop over time. One's about facing the fear of school, which is common, and using the behavioral technique of taking things one step at a time, breaking down challenging tasks. So you're really trying to present solid, research-backed practices, but in a way that's really kind of user-friendly for younger people.
Okay, that's cool. So is this deck part of your normal practice? Like, do you have a clinical practice where you see patients, or like, how did you come up with this deck, and in what context do you use it?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I don't use it directly in my practice. I don't actually use the deck. I mean, it's actually not a bad idea, but I think part of it just feels kind of too self-promoting to say in here.
You just say it's not in the cards.
No, I love those kinds of jokes. I'm a dad too, right? So that's
good. I love that.
It's in our contract to make those kinds of jokes. So my goal more and more as a therapist has been, and all my therapy, these days for the past, year and a half or so has been through video, is to help people bring these practices into their daily life. So, not just for us to talk about them and plan for them in our sessions, but really to have them when they need them, when things come up. And so what I loved about the cards is that they're so portable and easy to, like, they're really bite-sized. So it's obvious what we're focusing on.
What's an example on a couple of the cards? Like, what are some cool ones that people really like?
Let me actually pull one up so I can tell you word for word. So I'll read you a card from the CBT deck for anxiety, rumination, and worry. So this was a follow-up to the original one because so many people are dealing with anxiety and worry. So here's an example. This is from a think card, so dealing with our thoughts. The title is See Yourself Coping. This is one of my favorites. One of fear's greatest lies is that you won't be able to handle potential problems. When you're worried about something that could happen, start to see yourself coping skillfully with it. Recall the strength you've shown countless times as you've risen to the occasion to face challenges. Expect yourself to bring the same resourcefulness and determination to the problems of today.
That's pretty cool. Okay.
Yeah. So what I love about that idea is that, first of all, framing it as a single practice for the day, a person can take this card with them. I can come back to it as a reminder, because I know for me it's easy to say, oh yeah, I'm gonna practice that today, and then 10 minutes later I'm like, what was that thing I was gonna do? So it's a good reminder. And this one in particular I like because we can get into these arguments like, oh, like, what if this thing happens? Like, oh no, like it better not happen. Like there's a problem at work. So we're focusing on like, what if this happens? What if this happens? And there's a kind of background assumption that if it happens, I'm not going to be able to deal with it. Or if it happens, it's going to be terrible, rather than it's going to be another of, an ongoing series of problems that I've had to deal with. I mean, life is in a way just a continual unfolding of problem after problem that we deal with. Yeah. So I like to focus on, all right, what am I going to do if that happens, so we don't have to obsess about whether or not it's actually going to happen.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
So how did you write these cards up? Are these just good ideas you had, or are you drawing on a body of work that you just translated into card form?
Yeah, some of them were existing techniques, things that I had probably picked up over the years. Some were things that I had come to just in working with patients individually, and wanted to capture in this kind of more formal way. And then a lot of them were just either things that I had found helpful myself, because honestly, all of these are things that at times I find useful and rely on. And my process really was to decide about how many cards I wanted, and then just to start to sketch out ideas, like literally on pen and paper, because I tend to do better creative thinking that way versus with a blank page and a cursor on a computer.
Right.
And then from those kind of that very rough sketch, then starting to flesh them out and organize them and see, okay, I need more here. I need some more about facing fears. I need some about breaking down big tasks to make them more manageable. Some about confronting low mood and moving through that when we just want to withdraw, but in fact we need to do something rewarding. And then I have a great publisher and a fantastic editor who helped me really to polish them and get them ready to present to the public.
So do you have just one deck, or is a deck divided into 3 sections: the think, act, be, or do? Are there 3 different kinds of cards?
Think, act, be. So I have 3 decks, and each deck is divided into think, act, be. So each deck has the full cognitive, behavioral, and mindfulness suite of practices. And then there's the original CBT deck, which is fairly broad. A lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of self-confidence types of cards. Then there's the one that focuses on anxiety that I read from. And then the most recent one is the one for kids and teens.
So so how are you said you're not using these in your normal practice, but how are you using them? Where?
Well, other people are using them. I sort of offered them to the world. And, yeah.
Right, but how do people come across them, and in what context, and what kind of feedback do you get?
Well, thankfully the feedback has been super positive, which has led to the subsequent decks. But I think a lot of therapists are using them. For both for those who are maybe new to CBT or maybe are not experts in CBT themselves, but want to offer some of the practices. And then I even hear from experienced CBT therapists who just like them as a supplement to their in-session work. So I think that's a lot of it. And then I also hear from a lot of people who I honestly don't know exactly how people find them, other than searching for probably resources on Amazon or something. But a lot of individuals are using them with or without a therapist, just to use a card a day and deal with whatever they're dealing with.
So what kind of feedback do you get on them, and what kind of people give you feedback, and what are some interesting things they said that I don't know, exploded your head or you thought was really cool?
Well, again, I haven't kept many of those in my head, but the feedback I get from people that I've never met is often some of the most meaningful. It means a lot when someone I know, like my daughter, obviously tells me it was helpful, but it's really moving to put these things out into the world, and you have no idea how they're going to be received. And then when someone you've never met, maybe in a different country or a different state, is saying, I find this so helpful.
It'd be cool if you made an app that it randomly pops up one of these every day, so you can practice them and go through stuff, or it could take you on certain, like you could choose a track like, I'm very anxious. And I ruminate. So I want to go on that specific tract, and it shows you cards that are relevant to that, over time and stuff.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
I think that's great. Yeah, I actually just signed an agreement with an audio book company that's going to do something maybe fairly close to that. It won't match it to what a person is looking for, but because of the format, I think there will be that option of randomly selecting one, pulling it up. But I think I've definitely thought about it, but without really taking any steps toward it, but thought about appifying this because it does seem to lend itself really well to that kind of presentation. This is a review from someone named Ms. Sanchez. This excellent self-help CBT resource. I bought a lot of self-help cards, but these CBT are by far the best for my needs. I like that this set is based upon helping me learn to build positive emotions by redirecting my thoughts. It also has an extra element by giving me an exercise to practice and build skills each day. I just randomly pull one out and work on it that day, or look for a specific card when I'm feeling emotionally triggered and need to redirect, reinterpret, or reframe my thoughts. So yeah, it's touching, that people are finding these things useful.
So what are the elements of CBT that you found are helpful for people, and what kind of mental problems does CBT seem to work best for, and which ones is it not so good for?
Well, it's been shown to be helpful for pretty much everything it's been applied to, and I think it's because the approach is so broad. It's kind of like this is a bit of an exaggeration, but sort of like water. Like water is good for pretty much everything health-wise. Because it's really getting at kind of the underlying architecture of our minds and our actions. So thinking more helpful thoughts is useful for depression. Some of the earliest studies showed that on CBT showed that it was really effective for treating depression. There are medications that can be as effective as CBT, but in the long run, CBT does better once you're done with the treatment because you take it with you. It doesn't really stop once the treatment is over because you've incorporated or internalized these skills. Anxiety, for sure. There are tons of studies showing it's effective for anxiety. Obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder. Insomnia is a big one. CBT for insomnia, or CBTI, is really the go-to frontline treatment. Again, superior to sleep medications in many ways, and certainly not habit forming in the same way. And smoking cessation, alcohol dependence, relationships. So it's kind of like mindfulness in that way. I mean, mindfulness as a standalone approach is pretty much good for anything that you throw it at. And maybe sleep is a good comparison, that sleep, that pretty much every outcome that we care about gets better when our sleep improves. And in a similar way, when we're tending to our thoughts and we're living our lives in a way that's aligned with our goals, and we're letting go of resistance to the things we can't control through mindful presence, then things just tend to be better.
But you don't use this in your practice when you're doing your talk therapy over Zoom and stuff like that. Like, why not? Is it too much of an artificial prop or a crutch, or do you not know how to integrate it, or what's your thought?
Well, just to be clear, I absolutely use CBT. I just don't.
Oh, I know that. Now the cards.
The cards. Yeah. I guess I feel like I think of the cards as, at least from my approach, they're super helpful for someone who doesn't necessarily have access to a therapist. Again, they work really well in conjunction with therapy as a supplement to it. Maybe I'm just self-conscious about seeming like I'm trying to promote my own work.
Well, you can give them one card at a time as your homework. You do a session with someone, you talk about XYZ, and you say hey, I created these cards. Usually I sell them. Of course, I'm not going to sell them to you because you're my patient, you're paying, but a good homework thing for you to do, maybe to pick 2 cards and think about them during this week or something. And, maybe that would be helpful.
Yeah. I think we end up doing that, without the cards, but just offering them the same types of practices. And I guess an advantage of therapy is that I can tailor exactly what we do. Whereas the cards, there are lots of them. There are 108 in one, 101 in another, and then 58 in the kids one. So there are many options, but I can really, make sure that what the person is looking for is exactly what I'm asking them to work on. And a lot of people actually to now that I'm, as I think more about sort of where we are at this point, I mean, a lot of the people that I'm working with are not necessarily addressing those types of, working maybe on broader types of issues, like around, family of origin, or, kind of longer term, just the way practice goes. Sometimes you end up working with people for longer term than, a lot of the more kind of short-term focused CBT work. And so they, may have the skills, but really what they're looking for is more about, processing things from their past, or, dealing with broader issues that maybe don't sort of fit quite as neatly into, a kind of card-based approach.
So how does CBT help people in your experience? What is it about it that seems to work to help people to feel better?
Well, I think the simplicity of it is really appealing to people and really helpful, because it's something you can do on your own. It doesn't, you can learn it with a therapist, but it doesn't depend on having another person there. Like, other types of therapy, if you're depending on someone for their insights into your, internal dynamics, that really is a two-person process. But for this, the goal, my goal really is for a person not to need me anymore for the CBT skills. So the simplicity, the easy uptake of it, and again, these very basic processes that it gets at, like our thoughts. Like if we pay attention, our minds are always telling us things, and we often assume that they're true, and we take them for granted. So, an example we don't often think about, I think, is something like, well, let's say I'm worried that something bad's gonna happen today. Like maybe I'm worried that something at work, I'm gonna give a report at work and it's gonna go badly. So I can have that thought, things are gonna go badly today, and I might be anxious and nervous about that. And then I can recognize, like, all right, that's just a story my mind is telling me. But then we can go a level deeper than that. I think this is the level that we often don't get to, but I think the mindfulness element of CBT really helps us to do that. So we can, rather than getting locked into this, am I going to have a good day? Am I going to have a bad day? We can ask ourselves, why does my ultimate well-being depend on what happens during this talk at work today? And maybe there's a level of contentment that transcends these ups and downs of our moment-to-moment lives. And I think that's the ultimate value of CBT. There are these little, we might think of them as kind of tricks and hacks for our nervous system, but really I think what we're getting at is understanding the optimal way to live and for our minds to function. And a lot of that is letting go of the struggle with whether things are going to be for me or against me, and opening instead to more of what life brings us.
To don't see it as life's against me type thing. Just see it as like you're here living amongst all these other people, and life's not directed against you necessarily.
Right. Yeah. That life is life. That bad things are going to happen, but maybe the ultimate point of life is not to avoid pain at all costs, but really to have a fuller experience of what it means to be alive. I know for myself, I get stuck in these, in a real focus on wanting things to work out the way I want them to. And we can really end up kind of contorting ourselves in unhelpful ways and making our happiness so contingent on things that are outside of our control. And I think our ultimate, it's a bit of a cliche, but our ultimate superpower, I think, is to take back the responsibility for our well-being. And as I think I say this in one of the cards, but not to outsource our happiness, but to remember, to remind ourselves that our decision to be content is really an inside job.
So what's an example of like outsourcing your happiness? What do you mean?
So someone cuts you off in traffic, and then you're pissed off for the rest of the day, and there's an underlying assumption like that person ruined my day, or they ruined my morning. But what they did is they did something inconvenient and possibly rude and self-serving that lasted for a moment. And then I'm not at all saying I'm a master of this or that it's easy, but we have some choice in how much we hang on to that. versus how much we say, like someone tailgates us. And I find that really irritating, but I can make that a problem that has to be fixed, and I have to do something about it. And I have to punish that person for being such a blankety blank, or I can take
where
a
you
deep
can just
breath,
let it go and move on.
just let it go. Exactly. And that it feels for a lot of us, I think there's this kind of built-in assumption that that's losing, that if they offend me and I don't do something about it, then they won and I lost. But there's nothing that feels right. But losing really, I think, is allowing it to get us to bend ourselves out of shape more than we need to. And winning is moving on.
Yeah, no, it's hard to like sometimes something will happen in a day and it'll make me mad, and I try not to let it color the rest of the day, but sometimes it's very hard, so those kinds of things, it's like, it's an internal struggle to do that.
Yeah, it's super hard. But again, I think if we can, practice even, preemptively telling ourselves that I'm going to be in charge of my happiness for today, just for today. I'm not going to be, I'm not saying I'm not going to react to other people. I think that's normal, but I'm going to, as much as I can, remind myself that I have a choice. I can hold on to things or I can let them go. And I can question that automatic assumption that I have to get back at people.
What have you noticed over the past year and a half, if it's not obvious, like what is all the COVID garbage done to people's brains? It seems like it's scrambled them and affected them in bad ways. I mean, myself included, but like, what are you observing in your practice? What's it doing to people?
Yeah, it's been really tough in a lot of ways, as people know. I mean, with the uncertainty around the disease and so much loss of jobs and social contact, and I think really revealing for us in ways we hadn't been so acutely aware, just all the little things we take for granted in daily contact with people, and just the little incidental run-ins that we have, like at the gym, saying hi to someone, those encounters that are giving us little boosts throughout the day. And then we're maybe not consciously aware that we're missing those, but as we start to get them back, we're like, it feels so good to have this unexpected, deeply human exchange with the checkout person at the grocery store. Like, that's so nice to be back. So I think that's a lot of it. At the same time, there's, when we broaden our perspective, we can see there's for a lot of us, a lot of good has come from this time. I think a lot of people have found a kind of clarity in what's important, and being forced to pause has, I think, required us, or at least allowed us to examine a lot of the assumptions that our lives were based on, about how busy we had to be, or what we had to do, or how much we had to spend. And so that's what I've heard from pretty much everyone that I've talked to about this. This is not at all to deny the enormous suffering and desperation that a lot of people have experienced through this time, but at the same time not to ignore what's really a richer picture than that. And but I'm starting to say, pretty much everyone has said, I think somewhat guiltily, that but actually, like, there have been a lot of positives from this time. I think people are reluctant to say it because the pain for so many people is so much more obvious, but I think so many of us are realizing we've been required to grow in ways that we wouldn't have been had this not happened.
Oh, so you're seeing with your population that people are actually okay? They're not worse off? They're in some ways better?
Well, I mean, it's a complicated picture. Some are certainly worse off in some ways. I mean, someone said to me they hadn't been hugged in months, and that's someone who lived alone. That's such a painful statement. But at the same time, the same person might say, but there have also been positives from this time. So I think it's our brains are really good at honing in on what's wrong, because that's how we stayed alive evolutionarily, by noticing and fixing problems. But so I think it takes deliberate attention to ask ourselves, what might be right about this time, or what's an unexpected good thing. Sometimes even our problems reveal good things. So I think this is one of the practices on the cards, that most of the time, if there's something wrong, there's something right behind us. So an example would be, I had to take my daughter to the emergency room a couple of years ago, which is I mean, not a good thing. You don't usually go to the emergency room because there's something so good you have to go right away, right? It couldn't wait because it was a problem. But as I'm, carrying my daughter into the front door, I'm thinking, this is unbelievable that I live, a 5-minute drive from a hospital that's open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year with expertly trained medical staff, and they're going to take care of my daughter. That's an amazing thing. Or if I'm, stuck in the house with annoying people, at least I'm not alone. Or conversely, if I'm stuck at home and I'm lonely, at least I'm not, sharing this small space with someone else who's going to drive me nuts. So really, no matter what our lives hold, I mean, there's probably something good if we look deeper.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, that would make things more positive if you're able to do it. But yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. But I hope it's clear. I'm not talking about this is just like power of positive thinking, like just think happy thoughts. It's about being realistic. So if we've gone through a trauma, it's not asking like, what was the good thing about my trauma? And certainly not trying to force other people to come to that kind of an awareness prematurely. So like, what were some of the good things that happened from your assault? It's like, get out of here. Like, I'm not there. But most of us, even with traumatic events, and I know in myself, having lived through multiple traumas, as you look back, you recognize that you are the person that you are because of the things that you've been through, and why you wouldn't have chosen those things. You see with, again, very clear eyes. I'm not talking about like let's just think happy thoughts in a kind of Norman Vincent Peale type of way, but really let's be honest about our lives and take a broader view.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, very good, Seth. What's the best way for people to to interact with you if they want therapy from you, or to get your cards? Can you restate the name and where are they available?
Sure. So the cards, there are different versions of the CBT deck. So that's the title of the original one. And there's the CBT deck for anxiety, rumination, and worry. And then there's the CBT deck for kids and teens. And those are available pretty much wherever books are sold. They're certainly available online. If you can just do an internet search for those, you'll find them. People can also go to my website, my first and last name, SethGillahan.com. And they can find links there to all my books, online courses, podcasts, etc.
Okay, well, very good. And with the new, loosening of laws on telemedicine, are you able to work with people in many states, or where can you help people?
There are some people I can work with out of state, but I'm not able to accept new patients for the foreseeable future. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, very good. Well, Seth, thank you for coming on the call. And I want to check out these cards. They sound really interesting and helpful. So that's really cool that you did that.
Really appreciate the chance to talk with you, Rich, and to think with you about my work.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.